All right, welcome back to One True Podcast, my second podcast of the day. It's been a busy day already. Here with Zach Smith as usual. Zach, how are you?
Doing great, loving the cooler weather, and maybe got a few sprinkles down south a little bit. So
we have them here at my house too, and it's very exciting. And with us this week, typically when we have a guest on, I usually ask them a little bit about their background. I know this guy's background. We go way back. Jerry Hill of the Baylor Bear Insider. Jerry, you've been there at Baylor since 2008.
Yeah, it's starting my 16th year after 25 years at the beloved Waco Trib.
That's right. So I'm in my 25th year, 26th year now, I guess, at the Trib. So maybe it's time for me to make a move. Follow the Jerry Hill path. Jerry, always good to see you. And we have Baylor Long Island this week. But first, let's go back to last week a little bit. So, guys, I thought Baylor made some across the board improvements from week 1 to week 2. And yet the outcome still goes against Baylor, 20-13 against that 12th ranked Utah team. So I suspect that both of you, I know this is the case with Zach because we've had this conversation already, but are more optimistic about where this team is headed than maybe I am. So let's lay it out. Maybe you guys could convince me a little bit. What gives you hope about this Baylor team still having a good season? And what does a good season look like? What maybe record wise, what does a good season look like? And maybe you're recalibrating that a little bit after 0-2. I don't know, but either one of you.
There we go for it.
Well, and am I speaking? Because it says something about mute up there. Y'all
No, you're good. We hear you.
All right. What I would say is I had a lot more hope after this week than I did week 1. Like I walked away from the stadium after week 1 going, geez, where are the wins going to come from? And I will say I thought Texas State was much better than I thought they were going to be too. But Utah, that game, and I know it was tough the way it ended, but what I needed to see this week was improvement, and I did. Defense, I thought they played way better. They got tired, I think, obviously, there at the end, but I thought the defense pretty much on every level played better. Defensive line got more of a push. Linebackers were making play. I thought Matt Jones maybe had one of his better games since he's been at Baylor. And then secondary, they had 3 new starters in there. And I thought the secondary held up really well, particularly until that drive where they scored the tying touchdown. So that side, I feel a lot of hope. And, I saw a lot of improvement. Offense, first half, I thought looked pretty good, ran the ball, which they didn't do the first week. They were not able to run the ball other than a couple of longer runs. And this one, they did it more consistently. I think the offensive line, maybe some of the changes they made there, they were able to run the ball a lot better. So those things kind of gave me a lot more hope than I did in week 1. And for me, I don't know that my prediction, or I didn't make a prediction, but I will say, I think all along it's, go back to a bowl, win at least 6 games, was hoping for, 8 to 10, but I do think you have to temper it a little bit now. But if they can, and that would be, if you win 6, that's 6 of the last 10 now. So that's a tough task with the schedule they have, but I think that's doable.
Zach, what do you say?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of the points Jerry made. I think that the secondary specifically kind of gave me hope with 2 kind of true freshmen, Caden Jenkins, DJ Coleman. I know I've talked a lot about him over the last week. Really kind of
you were like, where did this guy come from?
Right. He just kind of came out. He was not listed on the depth chart, and he just kind of here he is and having this great game, and now I'm all in. And I know we can't talk to freshmen, but I really want to, so that gives me some hope, the secondary. And then, I know Sawyer Robertson threw those two big interceptions late, but like, he was doing, I think, kind of what they asked him to do, kind of being the game manager, kind of just getting them to the point where they had opportunities to score. There was a big question about finishing, which I know we were talking to the players about last night, but I think that you look at the two big injuries, Devin Lemire and Blake Shapen, and I think the people that have filled in for them, I think did it admirably, to the point where I think that 6-6 is a very, it's a level that I think that Baylor can get to this year. And, I know before the season I had them, maybe going for the Big 12 title game. Maybe that was a little bit of, new person comes to the beat and makes big prediction kind of thing. But I think 6-6 would be a very good season.
Well, so I'll do a little bit of good cop and bad cop. How about that? Because I can see exactly the points that you guys are making and agree with a lot of them. They definitely improved in that Utah game. And not only did they improved against a very good team. So that I understand why that would give people hope. You would think that Sawyer Robertson would continue to improve. And obviously when you get Blake Shapen back, all the better for Baylor, because naturally he played really well, honestly, in that Texas State game. It was just a case of, offensive line false starts. That's something they've got to get cleaned up, obviously. But I mean, you still have 6 home games left on the schedule. That's good for Baylor. And I thought the timing on some of those passes that Sawyer made, obviously he's been practicing with the twos, right? So, the more timing he gets with those guys, it was just like a little off. Some of those passes were just like barely overthrown. And if they can work that out, that's good for Baylor. But the schedule is going to be tough. I mean, you got Texas coming here in 2 weeks. They're looking pretty strong. You got some tough road games, including, last year's Big 12 champion K-State. So yeah, I do think they could get back to a bowl, but that may also involve them winning a game that they're not quote unquote supposed to win. So we'll see. Personally, I'm still a little baffled by the absence of Richard Reese in the game plan for Baylor. So he's made just 14 carries on the season, 7 in both games. And admittedly, he has not done much with those carries. So that may be why he hasn't gotten a lot. He's just 2.5 yards a carry. Listen to this, though. So last October, and Jerry will remember this well, Richard Reese had 31 carries, 186 yards, 2 touchdowns against Kansas. The very next week, they go out to Lubbock, night game, 36 carries. Obviously, that's a lot in modern college football. 36 carries, 148 yards, 3 touchdowns against Texas Tech. They win both those games. And then in the 7 games since, these are Richard Reese's carry totals: 4, 9, 10, 15, 8, 7, 7. Baylor is 1-6 in those games. I'm not saying it's all because of that. It obviously is not. But do you think that Richard Reese is in the doghouse, or is he just being outplayed right now by Dominic Richardson?
You can start on that one, Zach.
I mean, I think it's a nature of the way the games have gone, kind of. We've kind of harped on the offensive line kind of being a mess in the Texas State game. Blake Shapen was being pressured. There were Texas State players in the backfield quite a bit. And like we said, I think that improved in the Utah game. But I think the nature of how those games have been playing, Dominic Richardson is a much more physical runner. He's gonna run through people instead of around people. And I think just based on kind of how the games have played out, I think Baylor's kind of needed that. They needed that physicality. They needed that extra bit of, oomph instead of just kind of the kind of the twitchy nature of Richard Reese. So, I mean, you both of you have a much better grasp on what happened the end of last year, seeing it firsthand. But at least this year, I think Dominic Richardson just kind of fits kind of the way the games have been going.
He's playing better right now than
Right.
Richard Reese. There's no question.
Yeah, and I think a little bit of the end of the year last year was that he did wear down. That was you just told the numbers. That's 72 carries over 2 games, and I think he did wear down. I think he wound up with almost 300 carries, which was too much for a true freshman carrying that much of the load. This year, I think it's just been. I mean, some of it I think has been because of that offensive line. There have been so many carries where he gets hit in the backfield. He's a guy that needs a little bit of space. Dominic, man, you can hand it off to him and he's going to run through people, and that's just the way he plays. Richard Reese is not a run through guy. He needs a little bit of space, and that's where I think maybe you get him involved more in the pass game, short passes. Again, get him out in space where he's at his best, and I think he can make some plays out there. I thought maybe at one point, because it seemed like he was maybe even lining up there some in the preseason, that he might wind up being like a slot receiver. I think his day is still coming. I mean, Dominic is still your power back. When we got AJ Stewart for our podcast, Inside Baylor Sports, little plug there, last week, he talked about still them being a thunder and lightning combo. So, kind of the way Abram Smith and Treston Ebner were a couple of years ago. So I think you might see more of that as you go through the season. But that offensive line has got to get better for Richard to have any kind of room and to be a real factor in the run game.
Does Jeff Grimes have your phone number, Jerry? Because I like that. Get him out there in the pass game.
Yeah.
Maybe you could give Grimey some advice.
Yeah, I'm just going to walk down the hall and say, hey, Grimey, come on. This is what we're going to do. It's Long Island this week. We're going to get Richard involved in the pass game. Going to get him out in space. Yeah, I'm sure he's not even thought of that.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
They only spend like 25 hours a day on this stuff.
Yeah.
No, I like it. I think that's a pretty good strategy. And I agree with you that much as I've said over the last, I don't know, season plus, that I think Blake Shapen still has some really good days ahead. I think Richard Reese still has some very good days ahead. Yeah. So he's just too talented. And, it is funny, though, just how much the game has changed because, Jerry, we remember a time that 31, 36 carries, that wouldn't have been that big a deal.
Right.
But now it is definitely more of a running back by committee, let's keep them fresh kind of thing. And, it's just the way the game has changed. But there was a time you would just feed that guy till his wheels fell. So,
well, and they talked about it before the season that they're going to kind of go with the hot hand. And I think in some ways, Dominic has had the hot hand. Like, if you look at those two running back, like you said, Richard just hasn't produced in the times where he has had it. He hasn't had a lot of touches because I went back and looked. I couldn't remember how many catches he had. He's only had 2. So he's had 16 touches in the 2 games. And Dominic has had 34, so 17 per game. So you'd like to get that a little closer. Mm-hmm. And like I said, maybe get him involved in the pass game a little more. So I look for that. And again, if Richard starts cranking out 10, 12-yard carries, he's going to be the guy, and he'll get his chances.
Sure, absolutely. Like you said, feed the hot hand. So let me drop a truth bomb on you guys. So Baylor could have been playing great this year and lost to Utah. And I think everyone wouldn't have exactly, it wouldn't have been shameful by any means. The Utes are back-to-back Rose Bowl qualifiers. So Pac-12 champions. So let's look to the future of the Big 12 for a moment. The 8 new teams to the conference, the 4 that came in this year and the four that are joining next year from the Pac-12. Is Utah that team that is most likely to be kind of a consistent national power? And if not the Utes, who?
I'll jump in on this one first. I think Utah is the obvious choice, just because of the success that they've had. Kyle Whittingham has been there so long. He's got that program rolling. It's hard to imagine them having like a big drop off. So I would say of those 8, yes, it would be Utah. I think BYU is capable of that. I think UCF has had moments, up and down. And
what about Coach Prime?
Coach Prime,
come on, give it up for Coach
There
Prime.
we go. I mean, yes, absolutely. The start that they've had, and if they hold on to him, that would be my thing. Is he there next year or 2 years down the road, that kind of thing. But yeah, I think probably that's the 4 that I would look at. And Cincinnati, though, is a team that was in the college football playoff a couple of years ago. But I think I would probably look at those 4 first. Being Colorado, Utah, UCF. Did I add somebody else in there? I don't know. Cincinnati. I would look at those 4 first. But that would be my opinion. I think Utah kind of heads that list.
Zach?
Yeah, Utah is clear number 1 for me. But I'm going to kind of zig here. I think Arizona State is kind of a sleeping giant. I really like their coach, Kenny Dillingham. Right. He's a graduate of them. And I know they're kind of punting on this year, but, they've got, of the teams that are coming to the Big 12, they're only behind Colorado in terms of a recruiting class. And you can kind of see, I know we're going to talk about Texas in the future, but, you can kind of see what Arizona State is building. And I know that area, Arizona, Phoenix, is growing, lots of recruits. And if they can kind of keep some of those guys in Arizona, I think that they have a chance to kind of get back to a prominent level and kind of be a force in the new Big 12.
Yeah, and speaking of that new Big 12, I really like what the Big 12 has done here. I think we've said it before, but the 4 teams they brought in this year, I felt like were about the 4 best free agents that they could have gotten from that next tier of conferences. Obviously BYU was independent, not with a conference, but I thought, you couldn't have brought in much better teams in terms of football. I mean, those 4 had success in recent years, as Jerry pointed out, Cincy in the playoff. I mean, Jerry and I can remember seeing Baylor and UCF play in a Fiesta Bowl down there a few years ago. So yeah. And then they really wanted those 4 corners schools from the Pac-12. And Utah, I think, is certainly the jewel among those, just based on, again, what you guys said. But man, if they can keep Colorado, if they can keep Deion, there, I think they have the potential to be kind of a hot team, certainly among recruits. Zach talked about what Arizona State's building, and then, Arizona's had good seasons too in football. Now, where Arizona really helps you is making the best basketball conference in the country even better. I mean, let's face it, Kansas, Baylor, Arizona, whew, that's tough.
Houston.
Yeah, absolutely. So I like this league. I think it's going to be fun. You lose some big name schools in OU and Texas, but I think you've regrouped nicely. So give it up for the little drummer boy, Brett Yormark. So I will fully admit, and I admitted this to Zach on Monday, that I was wrong about Texas. I did not give the Longhorns much of a chance to go into Tuscaloosa and beat Alabama on Alabama's home turf. But Steve Sarkisian's team really controlled that game. They won 34-24, and this team looks pretty good. Zach was telling me they were good, and I'm starting to believe. But we've also seen this movie before, where Texas loses some games that it probably shouldn't lose. So what is the biggest hurdle for you guys that's standing in the way of Texas maybe getting that Big 12 title for the first time since 2009?
You want to start with that one, Zach?
Yeah. I'll kind of take some credit for picking Texas in that game. Not that it's
well played. Well played.
Yeah. I will never forget. I think it was after they lost to Kansas a couple of years ago, going to Sarkisian's Monday availability, and everybody in the room was just downtrodden and just like everybody was like, the sky is falling and fire Sarkisian and all that stuff. But he got up there and said, listen, we've got like this really, really good recruiting class that was filled with like 3, 4-star and 5-star offensive linemen and all this. And you could really tell that he had a plan, right? And that was a couple of years ago. And now that plan is coming to a head. And like to me, there's not much that can get in their way in the Big 12. Maybe Oklahoma. Traditionally, Texas is going to lose one of those games they shouldn't lose, like to Baylor, right? So like I think
you said it would be the most Texas thing ever for them to come here in 2 weeks and lose to Baylor.
Yeah, I'm not at the point where I think I'm picking Baylor, but I'm not too far away. Like if it comes to 2 weeks from now, if Baylor beats Long Island like 50-0, if they drop a 50 burger on them, I might pick Baylor over Texas. But let's see how Texas looks against Wyoming first, and yeah. So I think the answer to your question is not much, honestly. I think that this is a different Texas team. I think this is an Alabama-fied Texas team where they think they go into a room knowing that they're the best. Whereas I think there was always a sense of like, are we going to Texas this? So like, I just think they can't trip over over themselves, right? Which would be a game like Baylor. So yeah.
Jerry?
Yeah, I think again, their biggest hurdle is probably Texas. That's that they've got to be able to get out of or stay out of their own way. I think the biggest Texas being Texas would be losing this week. Wyoming at home. Wyoming just beat Texas Tech, so they're not a complete pushover. I was looking at their schedule though, guys, and most of their toughest games are right there at DKR. So I do think the road is paved that way for them, at least to get to the Big 12 championship game. They obviously have some tough tests. They're going to play Oklahoma in the shootout, and they've got Kansas State coming to Austin. They've got most of their toughest games they're going to be in Austin. So I look for them to at least be in the Big 12 championship game, but again, they could just as easily, slip up and lose a couple of games like we've seen them do pretty much every year.
College football is weird, and you can't. There's always some games where you're just like, where did that come from? And I will say, I think that Brett Yormark has to be sitting there thinking, no, not the Longhorns, not the Sooners. We don't want them winning the Big 12 on their way out. Let's keep one of these other schools, as the champion. But yeah, they certainly have the talent, which they have often had, but they do look a little more. The Alabama win was an eye opener for me. So Longhorns look tough, but there's a lot of football left to be played. That's a cliche, but nevertheless.
Could we say that maybe Alabama's not as good as we thought either? I think
agree.
That's a team that could go 7-5, 8-4 or something and be a disaster in Alabama. But I don't, and particularly at quarterback, I don't know that that's, they're not as good as they've been. It's still a great win, particularly on the road, but this is not the Alabama of, that won how many ever national championships with Nick Saban.
I think that's a fair point. And yet I saw some tweet, I think it was from Fox College Football, that predicted the New Year's 6 games, and they still had Alabama in a game. And I thought Alabama could probably lose 2 games at least and still get in just because they're Alabama. But that's a whole nother argument. So I'm going to set up this last question like this. Jerry, I've noticed Zach looking at me sometimes kind of with a funny expression, like when I do things like this. Da, 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 da,
kind of our thing.
Yeah. we do little weird things. We have
Yeah.
little, and I know he is already hating this. Zach is, but you and I are big hams, and so this.
I mean, I'm surprised he's still on here. Like,
Can I just
he
leave?
hasn't checked
he
out.
knows what's coming, and he's still on here.
Yeah. So I promised you guys that in honor of Baylor playing Long Island this week, that we had to have a little bit of a college football breakdown in our best or worst, whatever you want to call it, New York accent. So I'm starting with Zach.
Oh, this is. I might just leave. Can I just quit? Can I just? I
this
quit.
Is so not his comfort zone.
No.
Like I've gotten out of my comfort zone more in the last 3 months than I have in the last 6 years, and I've been more anxious. I've been walking around my house just doing this and practicing a New York accent. Like I'm walking here. Come on.
I love it. That was good.
Oh, gosh. Let's see. The Long Island's quarterback is Lucas Stanzini. Take the cannoli.
You got to do the hands. That's good. That really sells it.
I feel like my accent's it's like Boston meets Charleston. That's where I kind of go, but I'm trying to do New York, and I'm from the Midwest, so
you're closer. You're closer than us Texans to New York. So, Jerry, give me a little New York.
Kind of related to Zach. When I try to speak like maybe British or Australian, I'll kind of segue into the other one, or maybe go a little Irish or something, you just never know what you're going to get from me, but the Long Island Shacks are coming in this week, and we'll see what the Baylor Bears do, but I like the Baylor Bears against the Long Island Shacks.
Yeah, the Sharks are down by the water. And before the game, we're going to go get some coffee, and we're going to enjoy our coffee, and then we're going to go watch some football. And not for nothing, but, they don't know how to play college football in New York City. No, not
in New York. Not in New York.
Forget about it.
Yeah. It's the town the city that never sleeps.
Yeah.
But they don't know the football.
Oh, if anybody tunes in from Long Island, which seems like a remote possibility, but, they're going to be like, "Oh my gosh!"
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
Just apologize on behalf of us,
friends from New York.
All right, thanks for humoring me. I appreciate that. I knew Jerry would be willing. Yeah, we'll be doing that tonight at the Baylor volleyball game. That'll be fun. Yeah, guys, should be fun. I say Baylor gets its first win this week against Long Island, against those Sharks. Those Sharks don't have that much bite, I don't think. Yeah, and we'll see. Then you got Big 12 play starting the next week against those mighty Longhorns, and it'll be a very interesting game. There'll be a lot to talk about next week because it'll be the last Baylor-Texas conference game. It's just weird to think about.
Well, thanks for having me, guys. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for hopping on, Jerry. Appreciate y'all.
Absolutely.
All right. See ya.